On these last set of notes, we're going to talk about sequences of transformations. And what that means is we have more than one transformation that's performed in the same figure. So we're going to talk about that later. But first off, let's review a few of our different rules that we know. So reflection rules, if we reflect over the x-axis, we notice that the y value is just changing to a different sign. And that's because we are rotating over your x-axis or the other direction. If we rotate over the y-axis, we notice that the y value, or the x value, sorry, is changing signs, but the y will stay the same. If we rotate or reflect over the line y equals x, we noticed that the y becomes first and the x becomes second. When we rotated over the line y equals negative x, we noticed that our y and our x were flipped, plus the signs were the opposite of what they started with. For our rotation rules, our y became first, and we needed it in quadrant 1, so it needs to be negative first, so negative y and then a positive x. The xy changes for the 180 degrees, becomes negative x, negative y to make it in quadrant 2, so your sign has to be negative and negative. For 270, it needs to be in quadrant 3, so we know that the sign has to be negative for the y value, and the x stays the same, but the y value becomes negative. What I already said before was that if we have a sequence, that means we have more than one transformation that's performed on the same figure. And sequences are also called compositions. In example 1, we are going to take our triangle ABC, so let's go ahead and graph that first. We need to first translate it with our given vector. Now remember, this vector of negative 8, 0 means that we are taking each of our x values and subtracting 8. We are keeping our y values exactly the same and adding or subtracting 0 to those. So we are really just moving it to the left 8 units. So the easiest thing on the graph to do is just to count those 8 units. So my b prime would end up at negative 3, positive 3. But if we want to write this as a coordinate, this is one way that you can organize it. So I put first the original coordinates, so my pre-image coordinates right here, and then I'm showing that I'm translating each of those to the left 8 units. So remember, that's just taking 6 away from each of your x values. That means coordinate-wise, the y values will stay exactly the same. It's the x value that will change. So for the a prime, we have 2 minus the 8 gives us a negative 6. So we'd have negative 6, 1. If we were doing our c to c prime, we have 6. We're subtracting 8, and we end up with a negative 2. Now what we want to do is we want to reflect each of these coordinates in the x-axis. So it's flipping over. Now if you remember our rules up above, that means that our x value is going to stay the same, but our y value is going to become negative. Or you could just look at the picture first. We know a prime is 1 above, so that means we're going to call this a double prime since there's 2 transformations we had to do to get there. So a double prime will be 1 below. This would mean my coordinate would be a negative 6, but now it will be a negative 1 for our y value. For the c, it's 2 above my x-axis, so now c double prime will be 2 below the x-axis, and that would mean that my coordinate would be negative 2, negative 2. For the b double prime, if I look at just the coordinates, I keep the x the same, but the y will change, so it's going to be a negative 3. And that would end up right here on my picture. And then don't forget to connect all of your points together for your final coordinates. Now, for the question they were asking us is what is the x coordinate of b double prime? So that would be the negative 3. Now realize sometimes they're going to ask for just the x value or just the y value. Sometimes they ask you to add those two numbers together. It could be something completely random, but it's a way for us to tell, did you actually find those values correctly? For example 2, we're not going to go through all of it together, but what I want you to fill out right now is fill out what is the rule for the reflection and what is the rule for the specific rotation that is mentioned. Here are the 2 rules you should have written down. So the reflection in the y-axis is taking all of our coordinates if they started over here in the quadrant 1, it's reflecting it over. So that means that my x value is changing but not the y. so it becomes a negative x. Then if I need to rotate 90 degrees, it's switching your x and y, but it's also going to end up being a negative y and then a positive x. So not only do you have to be able to do the composition or the sequence of the transformations, but you also need to be able to tell from the picture of what happened from picture to picture. So on this letter A, we want to look for where the pre-image is. Now remember, we want to look for the letters themselves. We've got A prime, and A double prime. So we know this is the pre-image. I don't have much space in there, so I'm just going to say that's my first figure. Then I move it, and it becomes the A prime, and that's my second figure. And then the last figure is my A double prime. So we are moving first from here until this picture. And if you notice, it's not translating it because the shape is not saying exactly the same location, but it is flipping everything over. So this is a reflection first, and it's reflection across the x-axis. Then we can see that from our second figure to the third one, it's not reflecting because the points are not flipping around. We do not have a rotation where our triangle is now turned a certain way, but it is just translated, so it's slid this direction. So it's translated, but now we have to figure out how many spaces did it move. Now remember, we have to write it as a coordinate, so our translation, the x value goes first, and our y value will go second. So remember, our x value is left and right, the y value is our up and down number. So the easiest thing to do is just pick two of the letters. So I'm going to go from B prime to B double prime. So if I go to the right, so I know that's going to be a plus that number, and now we have to count the boxes. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes we moved, so it'd be x plus 6. Then we had to go up, so that would another positive, and we've got 2 boxes on there, so it'd be a plus 2. So it translated to the right 6 and up 2. Or you could write that as a vector, so with the little bracket, and you'd have just the 6 and just the 2 in there instead. For letter B, we can see that our first figure is here, second figure is quadrant 2, third figure is our quadrant 3 because of the little prime notation. Then let's see, we have from this figure to the next, I want you to tell me now what is the reason why it can move that way, or what is the name of the transformation. You should realize that it is rotating, and it rotated 90 degrees because it only moved one of the quadrants from that direction. Now for the next one, we can see it went just I was going to say it was going to go just straight down because that's what it looks like when you first look at it, but you have to look at the letters. So the letter A is one above and now it's one below, so it's actually reflected over our x-axis instead of rotated or just translated. We are going to skip the perform the transformation since we've done one of those already. You just have to remember what the rules are and go in a certain order. Now for the multiple choice, I want you to figure out which of these answers it should be. Now remember, you're paying attention to the numbers, so here's the original, then you move it to spot 2, then you move the couch to spot 3, and then to spot 4. So you have to figure out in order what is the transformation that then makes the composition. All right, so from the first couch to the second couch is not reflected, it's not translated, so it is definitely a rotation. So I usually cross out the ones that I know it cannot be, or you can put a little check by the words that does work. So now we're just down to letter B and D. So then from 2 to 3, we see again that it rotated around that corner. And looking at our third or second explanation, that was actually the same on all 4 of them, so that doesn't really help us any. But then the last movement, it just shifted down. We can't see if it reflected, so we're just going to assume that it's a translation, but if you look at those last words, there is no reflection, so it's okay. We just know it is not a dilation. That's if it changes the shape or size, and our couches are the same size. So our last step is translation, and the only one that we have 3 checks on. So if you look at the first one, we've got a slash, so it does not work with A. The letter B, we've got only 2 checks on there, so that doesn't work. Letter C, It's slashed out for the first word, and then rotation, rotation, translation. The only one that has 3 checks is letter D.